Welcome into a late night edition of Floyd Street's Finest, or early morning, whatever the heck you're listening to this thing. I am Jack Grossman, giving you some instant reactions to the ACC Championship game. Cards fall to Duke 73-62 in a hard-fought game over in Charlotte. And a game that Louisville had its chances. They competed for a long while there, but were kind of worn down by a really, really uber athletic Duke team. So we're going to get into that a little bit, get in some bracketology stuff, and just give some instant reactions, some thoughts on the cards as they end their ACC tournament run with a loss to the Blue Devils, and get in and get ready for Selection Sunday coming up in less than 24 hours, baby. There's nothing like it here. I'm Jack Grossman, joining you here on Floyd Street's Finest, part of the Field 68 Podcast Network. You can tell the Big West title game's going on behind me there. That's a barn burner. UC San Diego, UC Irvine. So that's going to be fun. You got to keep tabs on as well. But part of the Field 68 Podcast Network on Twitter at Jack Grossman 97, Blue Sky at Jack Grossman. You can find us on Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, however you consume your podcast. I guarantee you, we are there, Floyd Street's Finest. So let's go ahead and jump into it now. The cards again falling to Duke in a game that was really defined for a while by the brilliance of Terrence Edwards. And to me, a lot of it has to do with, obviously, Edwards kept Louisville in the game for the first 25 or so minutes of it, and then Duke adjusted, and Louisville didn't really have an answer for that. And that was really the big thing. We saw the injuries for both teams played a part in this game for sure. On the Louisville side, obviously, Rain Smith not being there really constricted the floor, let Duke really throw wave after wave at Edwards and Chucky Hepburn and Hadley and really limit them, especially late in the game. But that Louisville just didn't have the floor spacing that they're used to having. While on the other end, you could say, well, if both teams are fully healthy, Louisville won, maybe not so fast, my friend, because, Duke does still have a guy named Cooper Flagg that was on the bench, and Malik Brown as well, who were probably the top two dudes to guard Terrence Edwards are Flagg and Malik Brown. One of those two guys, or probably both of them, would be sharing the matchup at one point or another. So Louisville took full advantage. It's well done by Pat Kelsey and his staff to adjust on the fly to Flagg being out, and Brown as well, as he also got hurt in the quarterfinal on Thursday. And really seeing, there's a hole in Duke's defense here. Terrence Edwards can beat anyone else on Duke. He can beat them one-on-one. He can get to his spots. When he's hitting jumpers like he was for the most part early on in the game today, he's going to hit that also. So he did enough to not only just keep you in the game, give you a really real shot there for a while to win the game. And you look at things that they did, like the 7-0 run at the end of the first half, which coincided when Duke went zone. Louisville did a really, really good job of recognizing the zone. They had the play where Chucky was able to drive into a gap and find Scott for a dunk. Edwards hit a three. Then Edwards was able to get into the middle of the zone, get a little bunny to go as well to give Louisville a 4-point lead going into halftime. You're feeling, damn, pretty good. It was a little different from the first matchup where you had Louisville hit a bunch of threes early, and you knew they were going to kind of come down to earth at that point. And Louisville had a chance to be up by, 18, 20, 22 at halftime and maybe make it a little bit insurmountable for Duke. But if you remember, Louisville kept turning the ball over. They had some like 10, 12 turnovers in the first half. It left the door open just enough for Duke to where it was like a 7-point game at halftime, to where when the three stopped falling late, Louisville ran out of gas. Duke was able to overpower them. I bring that up because it was similar yet different. Yes, Duke kind of wore Louisville down, Louisville's third game in 3 days, short lineup, all that stuff. But it felt a lot less flukish how Louisville was able to build their lead into halftime and be competitive for those first 25 or so minutes. It was Terrence Edwards taking over. It was taking advantage of the mismatch that Edwards had. It was the fact that Louisville was doing a really good job for the most part. They struggled in some pick and roll stuff. We'll get that in a little bit, but they did a really good job for the most part defending Duke, running Concanipple off the 3-point line. They were good with that all game. He was 0 for 5 from behind the arc, taking Duke out of a lot of the stuff they had success with against North Carolina with Knipple, where he was the driving force for them. Louisville's big issue, to me, it came down to a couple things. Number one, they really struggled with Malak down low on both ends of the floor. You look at on the defensive end early on in the game, Duke was getting to those pick and rolls to where Louisville's having trouble stopping the ball and having a big guy coming and tag Malik to keep him from getting on a dive. Duke got a layup and two lobs early on in the game off of that. That wasn't great. Louisville adjusted, but that ended up leaving them in rotation some and leaving Tyrese Proctor mainly in the corner open a bunch. And Proctor torched them the entire game from behind the arc. He was 6 of 14 from distance there. That was something that Louisville really struggled with throughout the game there for sure. And on the offensive end, Edwards was spectacular, but you kept kind of waiting. It's like, okay, he's going to need some help here at some point. Duke, even without Flag, even without Malik Brown, they're too good. They're too athletic. They're too long. They're too disruptive defensively to let one guy beat them. And what do we see after Terrence Edwards gave Louisville that 45-42 lead? And he's playing out of his mind. He's playing fantastic. We saw a couple things happen. One, Noah Waterman picked up his third foul. And that's a big deal in this game. Because number one, because you don't have Rain Smith, Noah Waterman's really the only dude left that's a floor spacer outside of your big three of Hepburn, Hadley, and Edwards. So when you take Waterman off the floor, and they also in this stretch gave Hadley a little bit of a break as well. He didn't get much of a break in this game. He played a lot of minutes there. Edwards and Hepburn both played the full 40. Hadley played 38. So it was during this 2 minutes. It only needed these 2 minutes with this lineup for Duke to break this game open. But that's when Duke went on their 10-0 kill shot and 15-2 run to completely seize control of the ball game. Is when Waterman was on the bench with 4 fouls. Hadley had his one break of the game, and that left Louisville with a lineup of Hepburn, Edwards, Traore, and Connie Ruths and James Scott. And Traore plays his butt off. Ruths has a lot of potential and has shown moments. James Scott wasn't great in this game, but is a player that has been really productive for Louisville in a lot of games this year, especially that Clemson game just 24 hours ago. But in that spot where Duke's starting to throw the kitchen sink at Terrence Edwards and say, okay, we're going to blitz him off ball screens. We're going to double him when he drives into the lane. We're going to cut off drives. We're going to switch bigger guys onto him, whether it be Gillis or Malak or anyone that's just really trying to counteract him with size and really disrupt that rhythm he was in. What Louisville needed was to have that option for a kick out and an open three. And when it's Roos and Traore there instead of Waterman and Hadley or Rain Smith especially, and Hepburn's not having his normal offensive game, that's where you get into a trouble zone and say, okay, we have become a little bit too predictable here on the offensive end. Louisville didn't have the great ball movement that they usually have. They didn't have the great player movement in their floor spacing because of, one, the Rain Smith injury, but two, Waterman being on the bench in foul trouble really made them a lot easier to guard than what we're used to seeing from Louisville. And Duke being, even without Flag and Brown, with those two guys, they're probably the best defensive team in college basketball. Without those two guys, they're still a really damn good defensive team in college basketball, especially around the rim. And that's where you end up. It looked like it was too often of four guys just sitting around watching Terrence Edwards waiting for him to make a play, going up against guys that are taller, longer, and more athletic than him. Terrence Edwards is a great player. He showed that in this game. But that's not a winning formula game at possession after possession after possession. And that's a struggle for Louisville. That's kind of where the wheels fell off there a little bit on that end of the floor. The other thing, Duke really turned it more into a slogfest in the second half. They weren't getting up and down as much. Both teams weren't, compared to the first half earlier in the game, where we really saw Louisville be able to be disruptive. That was the other thing kind of going into the game. I put this out on Twitter and on Blue Sky, at Jack Grossman 97 on Twitter, at Jack Grossman on Blue Sky. Very shameless plug there. You know, I got to do that. But one thing that Duke really did in that first game, and you can't take a lot from the first game, but you can take little bits and pieces and something like this. The way Duke was able to neutralize Chucky Hepburn in that first game in December was they very simply just threw the ball to Cooper Flag, where Chucky Hepburn was not guarding Cooper Flag because he, as great of a defender Chucky Hepburn is, he's not tall enough to guard Cooper Flag. That's out of sight on him. That's just a fact. And they would let him bring the ball up the court and really run the offense through him as a point forward. That took away the ability for Chucky to pressure the ball the way he's so good at it. It's disrupted so many opponents. Without Cooper Flag in this game and Edwards guarding Knipple doing a really good job, Chucky Hepburn and Louisville was able to apply that ball pressure in the first half to be able to disrupt Duke's offense, speed them up a little bit, and forced some turnovers. They forced 7 Duke turnovers in that first half and scored 10 points off them. That was really, really important and really good for Louisville to be able to get out in transition, get a couple easy baskets before Duke could get their defense set and just get going up and down a little bit. What we saw in the second half was Duke handling that pressure a lot better. Maybe, Chucky getting worn down a little bit from playing all 40 minutes today, and yeah, third game in 3 days, all that stuff, that may have played a little bit of a role as well. But all these guys are on both these teams are playing 3 games in 3 days. But Duke was able to handle the ball pressure a lot better, to where they didn't get sped up. They ran their offense. They got good looks. They hit shots. And they relied on that athleticism to just kind of slowly work Louisville and just grind them in that second half. And Louisville just didn't have an answer for it. As I said, Duke turned the ball over 7 times in that first half. Louisville had 10 points off those 7 turnovers. In the second half, Duke only had 3 turnovers, and Louisville did not have a point off a turnover. If you're looking at stats and all that type of stuff, that really, really, really hurt Louisville. And especially when they became predictable on the offensive end, they're not getting out in transition. They're not forcing a lot of misses at that point, because that's when Duke kind of had their run where they were shooting the ball really well, too. Plus, Duke, being the aggressor, was getting to the free throw line more often. They shot 24 free throws to Louisville's 10. They made 19 free throws to Louisville's 5, so they were plus 14 at the charity stripe. That's a big deal. It turns into an uphill battle for Louisville. It just does. It's fair to admit it's not what you love to hear, but it's just kind of where you saw that going there early in that second half. And where we saw it impact was, you look at just Edwards' raw shooting numbers. When he hits that jumper to put Louisville up 45-42 with 15:08 left in the game, he's sitting there with 21 points, 9 of 16 shooting. So not only is he torching Duke, he's being pretty efficient doing it as well. You look at the rest of the game, everything Duke started throwing at him, he wasn't getting comfortable. He wasn't getting those comfortable, easy in-rhythm looks, whether it be, spot-up threes off the dribble, or slithering into the lane. Duke made it a lot more uncomfortable for him, and he finishes those last 15:08 shooting 3 for 13. That's not a coincidence. Duke's physicality and athleticism, just throwing wave after wave after wave, and the fact that Edwards just didn't have enough help in this game really, really hurt him. Chucky was in double figures with 14 points, but he was only 5 of 16 from the field, 1 of 8 from 3. Louisville outside of Terrence Edwards. Edwards was 5 of 12 on the game. Everyone else for Louisville was just only made 2 threes. Excuse me. Only made 2 just 2 of 14 from 3. The rest of the team was. Edwards was 5 of 12. The rest of the team 2 of 14. So when the rest of the team is shooting 14% behind the arc, for a team that relies on the 3-point shooting and the threat of shooting the threes, we've talked about it a lot on the podcast, Coach Lieberman and I, of, yes, Louisville wasn't the greatest 3-point shooting team all year, but they were a team that, one, did improve drastically as the year went on, especially in ACC play, where they were the second best 3-point shooting team in the ACC percentage-wise. And 2, even early in the year when they weren't hitting threes, when you had dudes like Smith, Waterman, and Hadley and Chucky and all these dudes, you have 4 or 5 guys on the floor that can shoot the ball and be a threat to hit threes. That stretches the defense out. That makes it really, really hard to cut off drivers. That's what opens up lanes for guys like Edwards and Hepburn to be able to drive and get into the paint for those kickouts, for layups and stuff like that. Louisville just 10 for 21 finishing around the rim on layups in this game, and that's because Duke really did not respect the 3-point line the last 15 or so minutes, because the guys that were in there weren't hitting them. Louisville didn't have as many threats as they normally do from behind the arc, both because of injury and foul trouble, and Duke took advantage. And again, I don't want to make it sound like if Rain Smith was healthy, Louisville would have won, because you were playing that game. I promise you Duke has the upper hand there with Malik Brown and especially Cooper Flagg there, but it did really hinder Louisville's attack in this game and really make it difficult for them. So the Cards do fall 73-62 to the Blue Devils in the ACC Championship game. The first time Louisville's made it to Saturday night in the ACC Tournament. First time they'd even made a semifinal, and they beat Clemson in that also. So looking at things bigger picture for Louisville, this was still a very successful weekend in Charlotte for the Cards. You picked up 2 more wins. You picked up your biggest win of the season on Friday night against Clemson, who's a top 23. I think they're 23rd in net right now. No, Louisville is 24th. I believe I can pull that up here real quick, but either way, Louisville gets their first quad 1A win of the season against Clemson. Clemson's 22nd in net. So that checks a big box that was glaring off their list was you don't have a quad 1A win yet. And yes, I know they beat Clemson early in the year, but the way the net breaks out, a quad 1A win, which for those who don't know, quad 1 is the highest quality. When you get within quad 1, they have quad 1A, which is the top tier of quad 1. So one of the big knocks on Louisville was that they didn't have that top of the line win, and Clemson's not going to be as good of a win as some of these other teams have, like the Ole Misses, the Marquettes, the Illinois, the Marylands that have beaten some really top 5, top 10 net teams, but it gives you a win that's in a similar ish range, and it ticks a box off, and that's something that while that was going to be holding Louisville back, keeping them maybe in the 7 line or possibly even the 8-9 game as an 8 seed come selection Sunday, now you look at it and say, okay, now you have it to where you can at least mark one down in the predictive metrics and the resume metrics, back up that Louisville should be closer to a 6, maybe even a 5 seed as well. Now you have that Clemson win. It makes it a much easier conversation for the committee, an easier choice to possibly put Louisville on that 6 line, which is really where Louisville wants to be here. That's something that Mark Adams and I talked about on Friday morning. The 1 seeds are down. You absolutely need to avoid that 8-9 game if you have any shot of making a second weekend run. But those 2 seeds look pretty damn good as well. Everyone saw what Rick Pitino and St. John's did earlier on Saturday evening, where the Johnnies reeled off 14 made field goals in a row to beat Creighton and blow them out in the second half after blowing Marquette out a couple nights ago to win the Big East title. They're probably going to be a 2 seed now. Michigan State, even though they lost to Wisconsin on Saturday, they're probably locked into a 2 seed as well. And then you're probably going to get Alabama and Tennessee as 2 seeds. Or if Tennessee works its way up to the 1 line, that means Florida's going to be a 2 seed. And I think Florida's the best team in the country right now, the way they're playing ball, how they whipped Alabama earlier on Saturday as well. So you look at it and you go, man, you'd really love to avoid playing one of those 18 in the round of 32. I know it's not a guarantee that you win the round of 64 game, but if you win that first round game and you're thinking, okay, how can you make a Sweet 16? You would absolutely love to avoid playing Auburn, Houston, Duke, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, and Michigan State, St. John's, and that whole group, man. They are phenomenal. And yes, I know March Rick Barnes can still happen. That might be the one you would want to get. But you're looking at it, and if you could get a 6 seed, and you look at who the 3 seeds are projected to be right now, teams like Texas Tech, Iowa State, Kentucky, Wisconsin. These are teams that, yes, they're still very, very good teams, but they're each flawed in one way or another. I think Iowa State's a phenomenal team. They're not healthy right now, and they haven't shot the ball without Lipsy and Maltsilovic has been banged up as well, to where they've kind of fallen out of that tier of teams that I really think can make a deep Final Four run. But if they were to piece it all together, I do think they still have that potential in them. But they're a team that doesn't shoot the ball great. You look at someone like a Texas Tech, JT Toppin's an absolute beast, but they're just not as good as the other teams. You look at someone like a Wisconsin, who John Tonje is on an all-time heater in this Big Ten tournament, but the Badgers don't defend, and Greg Gard doesn't have a great history in March Madness. And I think if they were to play Wisconsin, that's the type of game that very well suits how Louisville wants to play and how they can play. And I think they could beat a team like Wisconsin. Obviously, Kentucky is its own piece of the Louisville-Kentucky rivalry, but without Lamont Butler, without Jackson Robinson, that's a beatable team, and they've struggled against good offenses, even though they're playing better defensively in the last month plus. They still, you saw it against Alabama on Friday night. When they play a great offense, they don't have the answers defensively. And I think Louisville could take advantage of that as well. I don't know if they would win the game, but I think that would be much more competitive and much closer to a toss-up if they get one of those 4 teams instead of again, a 7 seed facing a 2 seed. That would be a very ideal situation for Louisville. Yes, I've seen a couple projections. Lenardi had it earlier the week where Louisville would be a 7 seed playing in Lexington, which would give you the de facto home game, which wouldn't be the first time Louisville's gotten that, even without being protected seed. Everyone remembers the the 2007 season where Louisville was a 6 seed and they played Texas A&M in the second round there, had that throw where Edgar Sosa scored 31 points, I believe it was. Missed the three at the end that would have tied the but and they almost pulled that one out despite that A&M team with AC Law, Billy Gillespie, and those guys being a really, really good basketball team. That might have been why Billy Clyde got the Kentucky job. That's the old joke there. I know, but you look at it and you say, yeah, that'd be great to play Lexington, but then you see the 2 seed is and it's Alabama. It's like, even in a home game, yeah, you don't want to play Alabama. Could you go put you in Cleveland with Kentucky, put you in, you know, um um in Milwaukee with Iowa State. That'd be a little bit better than getting that even with the home game in Lexington there if you're Louisville. And I think that's the only way Louisville would end up playing in Lexington. You do look, obviously, you'd love to beat Indianapolis, looking bigger picture region wise. That's more of just going to be a crapshoot since Louisville's not going to be a top four protected seed in the tournament. So that's just you got a 1-4 chance of getting de facto home games in Indy if you're in that region. Then win your 2 games to get the Sweet 16. Obviously, I would love it if they're in Atlanta because for those who don't know that, I live down here in Atlanta now, so that would be fantastic for it to be about a 10-minute car ride from my apartment. I would enjoy that, and that's obviously a short drive from Louisville, not as short as Indy, obviously, but a very doable drive that Louisville fans have come down here before for big time events as well. But to get one of those 2 regions, you'd love that from a regional standpoint, but you got to get to the Sweet 16 first. The other really important thing you got to look at is yes, Louisville had a lot of help from beating Clemson, getting their best one of the season. That's huge. Just as big and something that's not being talked about as much is the fact that all the teams around Louisville, in terms of the seeding, you think of like the Marquettes, the Illinois, the UCLA's, the BYU's, the Ole Misses, all these teams that Louisville's in this conglomerate group with. Because you look at it, I was talking to a friend of mine who does bracketology, and he was like, "Yo, everyone from like the last 5 seed to the top 8 seed is just one jumbled mess that you can't really decipher at this point." And you look at the fact that Louisville picked up their best one of the season against Clemson, while Illinois got absolutely embarrassed by Wisconsin. They got 30-pieced. Marquette lost by about 20 to St. John's. UCLA, that was Michigan actually, that torched Illinois because Wisconsin torched UCLA by 35 on Wednesday. Ole Miss lost to Auburn. BYU, as my desk is going up, so that's gonna be great on the recording there. So we'll go back down. 11:35 at night recording. You never know what's gonna happen there on that end. That's what we'll jack that one up to. But like I said, Marquette got killed, UCLA got killed, Illinois got killed, BYU, who was the hottest team in the country, Houston smacked him in the face with a 15-0 run on Friday night, and the Cougars never recovered. So they got blown out. Missouri got blown out by Florida. All of these teams, even though a lot of them were losing to pretty good teams, to in some cases really elite teams, that brings their metrics down just a little bit more, just a smidge more. You look at Louisville, who, yes, they lost by 11 to Duke, but KenPom's already updated for the night. Louisville stayed at 23 in KenPom, so they didn't drop a spot for that. You look at the net, and you see that the Cards are 23rd coming into the day. They might drop a spot or two in that because whereas KenPom does not factor in the injuries, the net does factor it in because they'll have the spread. So where Louisville played about to expectations to what Duke would have been with Flagg and Malik Brown, they were projected to lose by 10. They lost by 11. So henceforth, they stay at 23rd in KenPom. In the net, they have them adjusted to where they were only projected to lose by 6. So they might drop a spot in the net. It won't be anything drastic though, but you see where Louisville's predictive metrics, even though they're sitting at just 4-5 and 4-6 now in quad one games, because that West Virginia game with Colorado State going on the heater they've been on knocked West Virginia out of quad one again to where they're 51st in the net. So that's a quad two win for Louisville. Now Indiana didn't quite get to quad one as well. They're sitting at 54th in the net. So those are 2 wins that are close, but no cigar for Louisville. They're sitting at 4-5 in quad one. Whereas as a lot of these other teams like BYU has 8 quad one wins, Illinois has 8 quad one wins. Missouri has 7. Marquette has 6. UCLA has 9. Ole Miss has 8. So where Louisville doesn't have the quad one wins, they do have very similar predictive metrics and also resume metrics. They're 10th in KPI, so they're 20 spots ahead of Illinois in strength of record. They're 19 spots ahead of Mizzou in strength of record. They're 10 spots ahead of BYU, 14 ahead of Marquette, 18 ahead of UCLA, and 2 ahead of Ole Miss. So strength of record really, really loves Louisville. Louisville's higher and wins above bubble than all of these teams except for Ole Miss. And those are things that weren't true a week ago. So you got to look at what's the committee going to value here. Are they going to look at purely the quad one wins? Are they going to look at the predictive metrics that are pretty similar? Or are they going to look at the resume metrics that favor Louisville? Now, Dan Gavitt was on CBS earlier on Saturday talking about how they use the resume metrics a little bit more to determine who gets into the field, and then the predictive metrics when it comes to seeding the field. So the predictive metrics would be your net, your KenPom, your BPI, your Torvik, those types of metrics that shows you, okay, if you're playing this team, what do we predict what you're going to be? Whereas something like strength of record or wins above bubble isn't trying to predict how you do against other teams. It's looking at the results that you've played and saying, how would an average team have done against your schedule? So it is a little different, very confusing, I'm sure, as we get very deep in the weeds here on a Saturday night. But when you hear things like net, KenPom, or Torvik, those are predictive metrics. When you hear things like KPI, strength of record, or wins above bubble, WAB for short, those are resume metrics. The resume metrics favor Louisville. The predictive metrics are very, very similar. So if you look at those and you take Dan Gavitt by his word and saying they're using the predictive metrics to try to organize all these teams, some of them being Missouri, Illinois, Louisville, BYU, Marquette, UCLA, Ole Miss. You can throw Clemson in there as well. They're kind of at the top end of that, where the predictive metrics are all pretty similar. I'll just read them all for you. In net, I'm looking at the 16, 17, 23, 24, 25, 26, 28, and Louisville's 23rd in net. So they're smack dab in the middle there. So that means they're probably going to be close on that 6-7 line, pushing towards a 6. If they use that tiebreak as the quad one win, Louisville probably isn't going to get there. I'll be completely honest. But if they look at the resume metric as being a tiebreaker, that's where Louisville has a strong chance. And that's something that really wasn't as possible before this week, before Louisville picked up that big Clemson win. That's really, really helped them both resume metric wise, predictive metric wise, and getting that statement quad 1A win. And plus that all these other teams have taken a little bit of a step back here by being just absolutely smoked in their conference tournaments. So that's going to be something that's very interesting to see how it shakes out tomorrow or later today, I guess, on Selection Sunday, to where you look at it, because that's going to really, that could make or break a tournament run for Louisville. Because you know what they say, it's all about the matchups, man. It is all about the matchups. And you look at bracket matrix right now, again, you would really, really like to avoid that 7 line where you get Alabama, Tennessee, Michigan State, or St. John's in the second round. If you're on that 3 line, Texas Tech, really good but beatable. Kentucky, very flawed. Iowa State, not healthy. And Texas A&M, very flawed. Those are on the 3 line. Wisconsin might also, if they climb up to a 3, that's a team that would be that's a flawed team as well. Very good. You're always going to be facing good teams in these fields and in these tournaments, but you want the best shot you can. Obviously, it doesn't take a genius to say that. So we'll see where Louisville's at. There again, any other year you would look at and say, yeah, you're 13 and you're 18-2 in the ACC. You went to the ACC title game. You're going to be like a 1-2 seed, right? At worst, but no, that's where we're at with the ACC. Again, this year, we've covered that as well. So it'll be fascinating to see where Louisville heads up. We will know in less than 24 hours, in less than 18 hours, really. It's going to be a beautiful, beautiful thing. So for anyone that's up listening to this tonight, really appreciate it, or in the morning as well. Until then, the next time we talk, we will have a bracket. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And Louisville, for the first time since 2019, is going to be in that field of 68. And we'll be back all week to break it down and preview the matchups, react to whoever Louisville gets, and we are going to have an absolute blast doing it. So for myself, Jack Gross, for Coach Lubin, he'll be back next time. This has been Floyd Street's Finest. Yes, I know not the result Louisville fans won today, but a lot to be hyped and excited about for the cards coming up this week. We'll catch you next time here on Floyd Street's Finest.